By 3 years old, she was reading books, many of them. By 4th grade, she was reading 700 to 1,000 pages beyond her weekly school assignments. She had an incredible thirst to learn about things and do things. And the other part that's beautiful about her is she always would come back and say, Mommy, I can do these things. What am I going to do? That you have always said we have to take our talents and our good things and make a difference and try to find a way we can help other people. So how am I going to do that? And of course, we kept, my husband and I, encouraging her to keep on with the wonderful gifts that she had. And it was a beautiful thing. She would get skills, and she had great skills in math and was accepted into many advanced classes in several subjects. She got into the best schools in the country, hardly ever even had applying in many cases. So she started, after all of her grade school and high school, to plan to go to college. And she scored 800 on her math SAT and was a National Merit Scholar finalist. She was accepted at Brown University, Dartmouth, Duke, and Notre Dame, and decided to go to Duke. It was warmer down there, Mom and Daddy, you know. Some of those schools up there are so cold. She also wanted to learn something different besides its education. She loved horses. She loved to be involved in many other activities that she had competed in very closely. And she, was really wanting to make a difference. So she graduated from Duke in 3 years after majoring in math, economics, and philosophy. Can you believe that? I don't think I ever could have done that. My husband's PhD is economics. My husband and I met when we were working on our PhDs, and we ended up being married at Notre Dame. So there's a little history here for us. And also we came from very large Catholic families, 8 brothers and sisters. And so we had a very strong religious foundation, which we thought was such a great gift because it would help us with the children and help them make a difference, which they had learned was very important. So after she graduated from Duke in 3 years with majoring in math, economics, and philosophy, she decided to take a break from the academic and work with an accounting firm where her dad had been working, and just take a little break. And as she did this for a little while, she decided that she really missed all the academic achievement side, and so she applied to several top schools, graduate schools that were very well known and everything. She was accepted at the #1 business school, full scholarship at Wharton School. And so we had the great joy and happiness to pack her all up and put everything together and get us moved to Pennsylvania, Wharton School. She was just about to finish her first year, which was May 8th of 1990,
May 7th, 1998.
98, right, thank you. And that was when things started to change for her in her life and for all of us. But I want you to know that the values that she got through all these years were very important. It was part of this outline here, that what are the values of service that led to the children's activities of volunteering. She had all those values and chose to her, and she went to the schools and did all the parts of things. And she was just ready to just go forward with everything. But one night, I'm going to let you tell a little bit about that.
Okay.
That's hard for me.
Okay. She was studying for her final exam. She had 2 exams she had to take. It was a Thursday morning before Mother's Day in 1998. And someone broke in to her apartment at 2 o'clock in the morning and attacked her. She screamed for help. The neighbors called the police. The police were there in about 6 minutes from the end of the 911 call. The neighbors could not convince the police that the scream they heard had come from her apartment. She was in a 2nd floor apartment. The guy had managed to climb up onto a balcony and broke into her apartment. The neighbor below had heard a scuffle. The neighbor across the hall heard the scream. The police would not believe that the scream came from inside the apartment. They knocked on the door. They turned to the neighbors. They said, nobody answers, nobody's home. And they left. They were there for 5 minutes. The next day, Sean was passing through town. They were supposed to have lunch. Our son, Sean, his sister, or Shannon's sister, Shannon's brother, I'm sorry. And she didn't show up for lunch. And so he went over to her apartment and started ringing the doorbells. Well, the neighbors came down. It was actually the neighbor that had called the police the night before. They went running up the stairs. They broke into her apartment and she was dead. I'm not going to dwell on the police story because it's a long story itself. The issue tonight is about the death penalty and our confrontation with it. With Kirk here, it's probably foolish for me to say this, but the vast majority of people in this world, in this country, think about the death penalty in extremely abstract terms. They hear about some horrific crime. I like to point to one down in Texas that happened about the time Shannon was killed, where 3 guys chained a guy behind a pickup truck and drug him down the road. You hear about these very horrific crimes. You don't know any of the people, but you can certainly picture what these animals did, and your instant reaction is, somebody that's as pitiful as that doesn't deserve to live. You go on about your business and you don't think about it much anymore until some years later you hear that one or the other of these guys is about to be put to death, and you kind of say, yeah, he's getting what he deserved, and you go on about your business. For us, very quickly, it became clear that the death penalty was not going to be an abstract event anymore. It was something that was going to directly interfere with our lives. A couple of nights after Shannon was killed, we were at church. We typically go to church on Sunday evening. As things were going as fine as they can go, 2 days after your daughter has been murdered, a very loving daughter, one we loved, and she loved us really tremendously. Things were going fine until we got to the Lord's Prayer. And I got to the phrase, forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. And I was struck dumb. I just could not say that out loud. And it struck me that there was something about Christianity that Vicki and I both grew up in Catholic homes. I grew up in a family that said a nightly rosary. I went to Catholic grade school. I went to Catholic high school. I went to Catholic college. I went to Catholic grad school. I was about as injected with this. I don't know how many thousand times I'd said the Lord's Prayer, and that I had never focused on the Lord's Prayer the way I focused on it that night. The police let us know fairly early on that this was a Capital One case. It was first-degree murder, and that the death penalty was on the table. We let them know fairly quickly that we were interested in pursuing the death penalty. They urged us to hush ourselves and not make a public issue of that because it was going to complicate their prosecution. It took 4 years for them to catch the fellow. He was a serial rapist. It turns out, as the investigation played out, the police in Philadelphia were not properly classifying sexual crimes, sexual assaults. And 2, he had attacked 4 women in Shannon's neighborhood before he attacked her. 2 of the cases had been classified as non-crimes. And because of that, they had a policy. They would only notify the community of a serial attacker when they had 3 assailants in the community with a known attack, or three attacks by a single assailant in the community. And because 2 of them had been classified as non-crimes, they didn't notify the community. So when she was stalked 2 nights before she was killed, she was walking home from a movie and this guy started following her. She didn't know what was going on. So it took 4 years for them to catch him. By the time they caught him, he was attacking young women out in Fort Collins, Colorado. And when they arrested him, by then it was quite public knowledge that we opposed the death penalty. But the DA went out the day after he was captured and said she didn't care what the Schiebers thought about this. The death penalty was the appropriate penalty. Michael Smerconish, a editorial writer at the time in the Daily News in Philadelphia, wrote an open letter saying we didn't have a right to oppose the death penalty, that was the appropriate penalty for the crime this guy had committed. The Daily News was very gracious. They let us write a fairly lengthy rejoinder, and we explained both the religious terms and the various social aspects of the death penalty that we opposed. It's quite discriminatory on a racial basis, on an economic basis. It's not evenly applied across jurisdictions. There's a whole variety of issues. You probably know most of them. We actually prevailed, and they negotiated a plea. He was willing to plead guilty as long as he didn't face the death penalty for Shannon's murder. He pled guilty. They negotiated a plea. He pled guilty in turn for accepting a sentence of life in prison without parole. The day after he was sentenced, the DA went out again and said it still didn't make any difference what we thought about the death penalty. It was the appropriate penalty, but she decided that if he would confess to the crime, that they would accept his confession and accept a life in prison without parole sentence. We have subsequently continued to work very hard around the country in opposition to the death penalty. I, on the religious front, have still think that the Sermon on the Mount and the Lord's Prayer is extremely important. I have come to consider a more direct bit of evidence about what Christians should think about the death penalty is the encounter that Christ actually had with a woman who was about to be stoned to death. The Pharisees and scribes brought this woman to Christ to ask what he thought about carrying out the law. He said nothing about the law. He said nothing about the evidence. He did not ask about any of the victims. He turned to the would-be executioners and he said, "Ye without sin should cast the first stone." And they all had to walk away. So I think I have never heard that. I've heard that story in gospel read in church many times at Mass. I've never had it quite interpreted the way I've come to interpret it. I guess most of the priests that have interpreted it when I've been at Mass probably haven't had the experience that we have. But I think it's a pretty direct explanation or example of Christ's attitude toward the death penalty. And if we want to live as good Christians, we have to accept that. Vicki wants to close here fairly quickly, telling you why eliminating the death penalty in Pennsylvania is so important to us.
Well, when we first learned, I don't think we knew much about the death penalty. My background, my educational training, my advanced education, I used to teach at the University of Maryland in graduate school for several years, is what my field was social work and social justice. And I thought that was a great gift for me to help me get through what we as a family had to go through. Thank you, God. I learned in the process that those that hold on to hate and anger are only killing themselves, are only destroying themselves. And that when we started to talk and work in social work, and I mean in murder victims' families groups, we got very actively involved in them. We could just begin to see the reality of, So people would come up to us, how did you let this go? How did you have this positive attitude about it? I mean, there's so much anger, there's so problems with divorce, there's problems with unemployment, there's a lot of families breaking apart. And it's, you tell your story, you say, this is the reason that some of these problems happen, but you have to work around this. You have to find ways to be positive. But that's not easy. I'm not saying that's easy, but it is a very important message, and it's an important field that we do a lot of work with, because, hatred only destroys those who keep it inside of them and let it fester. So we have been very actively involved in organizations of murder victims' families, get invited to come out and speak and get involved. And I have seen in that period of time, 23 years since Shannon left us, some very positive things, that this is moving forward. Our big hope and prayer is, and we would like yours too, that when Shannon died, there were only 9 states that didn't have the death penalty. And we just recently, as you know, up to 23, please God, more and more. But we especially are working a lot now with the PDADP, because it's the state where Shannon died. And it was very important to us to see that death penalty pass there. And that is, what I keep talking to her up there in heaven about is, Shannon, you got to pull some strings up there and help us with Pennsylvania. But it is a dedication of ours to see that this gets done. I keep telling her I can't come home to see her till we get all these states passed, and it's all gone. So it is our life's work and our dedication. And it's been an amazing gift to us and to our family, for sure.
One of the things we have seen in our meeting people that were on the other side of the issue, they're typically cordial meetings. There's never been contempt on either side, is how destructive the death penalty is for the survivors. Amen. Of victims. In most cases, the death penalty is not carried out for 15, 20 years. I mentioned before the case down in Texas. Those three men committed that crime 1 month exactly after Shannon was killed. 2 of them were sentenced to death. The last of those death sentences was carried out in April of 2019. Now, if you think about it, in our situation, we insisted we not pursue the death penalty. The assailant was willing to plead guilty if he didn't face the death penalty. He was captured on the 23rd day of April in 2002. He pled guilty to Shannon's murder in court on the 30th day of May. In about 5 weeks, we were completely done with all of the legal proceedings related to Shannon's death, and we could go on about our lives. Had we insisted on the death penalty, he would still be alive, sitting in prison in Pennsylvania. We would be going through retrials, we'd be going through hearings, we would be contending with this some 23 years after it occurred. It's very telling that the son of the man that was behind that truck that night and drugged to his death, when they finally killed the second guy, he was very openly opposed to the death penalty. It just takes a terrible, terrible price. Mark Twain is often quoted as saying that hatred is an acid that does more damage to the vehicle to the vessel in which it is stored than on anyone on whom it is poured. I didn't understand wrath being one of the deadly sins until I met people that had been through this marathon of 15, 20, 30 years waiting to have somebody killed for them.
And I wanted to get in touch after this was evolving. At the end, I wanted to get in touch with the counselors there at the prison. I don't think they call them counselors. So that someday I could go talk to the person who did this to Shannon. I would like to have talked to him, tell him how we felt about it, how we were praying for him and everything else. It took a while, but we did eventually get to have that communication. And the beautiful letter that was written as a result of that was something that the tears couldn't come fast enough. How thankful he was that he had been given the freedom to open to this, and he was trying to be very, very good and improve his life. And and even the counselors there at the prison, the warden said he just has turned around and become a beautiful human being. Can you imagine that?
Wow. Thank you. Thank you so much. Let's turn it over to Kirk Bloodsworth, and he'll be sharing his story.
Syl and you guys are something. Every time I hear that story about Shannon, I just, thank you for all the years you two have done this. Vicki, you're such a pleasure to see. And it's a shame, we can't see each other on better circumstances. But the Schiebers and I have spoken on many occasions together.
Many years.
And it's been a long time. It seems this is my 29th year of being a free man and being an abolitionist. But in 1984, I was an honorably discharged Marine with no criminal record or criminal history. I'd never been arrested for anything in my life up to that point. I'm not going to sit here and tell you all I was some sort of angel, but I know that what I wasn't doing. And, I might have drank a little bit and then did a lot of different things. I was a commercial fisherman on Maryland's Eastern Shore. I grew up, that's a hard lot of people. My other side of the family worked in the timber business. I was an avid churchgoer since a little boy. Now, I didn't turn to Catholicism until later, and I'll get into that in a second. But in the spring of 1984, I had met a woman, and she was 10 years my senior, and I never thought of anything. All I saw was love and who I was in love with, and that was that, And I remember, God tells us things, and when we don't listen, it's interesting. So I'm going to my wedding, right? And I'm heading into Baltimore, Maryland. I'm going from the Eastern Shore, and I haven't had anything to eat, and I get the visor down because the sun's in my eyes, and there's a fortune cookie that falls down. I just grab that thing and eat this fortune cookie, and I'm not even paying attention to the fortune that's in it until I look down and picked it up, and the traffic slowed up on top of the span, and I looked down at the fortune, and it said just 2 words: turn around. Now, that's a true story. It's like everything else I'm about to tell you. I had no idea, but that is, I got married, and my wife wouldn't stand for the waterman's life, and I felt like, well, I'm never going to be able to work if I had to deal with, going out every night. I can't. Working man can't do that. You could do it for a minute, but you're going to pay for it. And and I'm talking about 16-hour days, 6 days a week, a half a day on Sunday, working for a commercial crab potter. And I was just trying to get my life to better. I had to mind my mind to get a boat, and do it myself. And because my father was a fisherman, his father was a commercial crabber, his father, it went back all the way to the late 1700s. And early 1800s. So there's a lot of Bloodsworths back in the day. There's an island in Chesapeake Bay named after my family called Bloodsworth Island. So I'd have to tell you, the depiction Norman Rockwell gave as a family in his, Saturday Evening Post and all, and that was the idyllic Bloodsworth life. We were just like something out of one of his portraits. Working and just, we worked all summer, and we went hunting and fishing in the wintertime. missed my wife so badly that summer. We left about, I sent her up there around June, I guess. I was pining after something fierce. So 4th of July weekend, I had off, and I went up to see my wife. And, I stayed there for about 30 days, I guess, all told, because it was 4th of July weekend, and that I had moved up there. So by the time it was less than 20 days that I left, it was less than that. So August 9th, 1984, I couldn't stand living in this environment. Nobody was working. People were stealing stuff from people's gardens and all. That's just not me. My father and mother would tan my hide if I'd done stuff like that. I figured we could dig a ditch and make money, all of us, if everybody did it. It's I was all about that working. And my wife would stay like 2-3 days out on the cuff, and just with people I had no idea who they were. And but that was my fault. She told me all this, and I just, just like any man, sometimes you want to fix something. I couldn't fix her. I came back to the Eastern Shore. And I remember, so it was August the 4th, and I was staying at my cousin's house, and my parents were away or something. I can't really be sure where they were. But I remember it was August 8th was the last time I ever seen my mother in her house. And she had fried chicken, and she made these, rolls and stuff, and mashed potato, the whole big deal, And my mother's fried chicken was like every other son's mother's fried chicken. It was so good. And I hadn't had a good meal in so long, I didn't weigh much then, but I was still 200 and some pounds with the fieriest red hair you ever seen. And with sideburns that were red, just like Eddie Murray. I might not care for the Ravens, but I certainly love the Orioles. And, it's that's something that I can remember sitting on a picnic table with my dad back in the day, listening to it, Chuck Thompson on the radio, and all of these things. And I thought my life was great until I went to Baltimore. Now, in the meantime, doing all that, now think about it. You're just going on with your life, you're going on with your life. I never really thought about the death penalty. I believe people got what they deserved, as a Marine. That's what Marines think. Well, you're going to get what you deserve in the end, but that's not true. A 9-year-old little girl by the name of Dawn Hamilton was found brutally murdered in a wooded area near her home. She was found lying face down in a pile of leaves. And the child had the friends over the night before, and they had a sleepover. And that next day, they were when they go outside after the Facts of Life were playing on TV. They wanted to play hide and go seek. It was 1984 was one of the hottest summers I ever can remember in my memory, and that's probably because it was 80 degrees as the sun rose. That summer it was the hottest thing. Well, a search ensued for the person responsible. He was described as follows: 6'5", curly blonde hair, bushy mustache, tan skin, and skinny. Now, I've always been a pretty robust fella, even when I didn't have no weight on me, but I weighed 212 pounds at least back then, and I'm just about 6 foot tall with a pair of sneakers on. Now, my hair, as I was telling you, is red as a live button that's on this Facebook thing right now. I mean, fire engine red. And mustache the whole bit. And I don't tan because I'm a redhead, It was just these little things that kept piling up. And the more they kept piling up, the harder they tried to fit me in the mold. that proverbial square peg in the round hole got a lot of gaps around it. And I didn't know what to do. I remember being interrogated by the police the day of, and then at 2:45 that night on August, the morning of August 9th, there's a big bang on the door. Open up, it's the Baltimore County Police Department. They have a warrant for arrest of Kirk Bloodsworth. All I had was a pair of running shorts on. And I went to the door, they shined a light in my face because I had no air conditioning. I was at my cousin's house. I just, my parents and I, we just was really bumping heads about my life. And I would have had to agree with them. I was, wasn't living the way I was supposed to. And I followed my heart instead of my senses. Well, when they handcuffed me behind my back, walked me barefooted across the stone parking lot to the police car. And that was the last time I seen Cambridge, Maryland, for 8 years, 10 months, and 19 days, 2 years on death row. I had no idea, man, what I was getting ready into. Now, I'm going to talk about lawyers. The Schieber talk about lawyers on the prosecution side, but I want to talk about the lawyer I had. Now, I want you all to picture a prison visiting room, okay, with a glass partition. The lawyer, you have to talk on a telephone like that through the glass. He walks into the visiting room through an archway that's 8 foot high and 10 foot wide. He sits with his back on a brick, with his back to a brick wall. And there's an archway on the other side. And the first thing out of his mouth, he says, "Kirk, you're in a lot of trouble." I thought that was very astute of him right off the bat. But we talked about the case, and one of the other things out of his mouth, he said, "Don't worry, though. I know my way around the courtroom. I know my way around the criminal justice system. We're going to find our way out here together." So we talked about the case for 20 minutes, one of only 3 visits I ever seen this man. And right before he gets ready to leave, he says to me again, he points at it and says, "Kirk, we're gonna find a way out of here together. I know my way around the courtroom." Put his hand on the glass to say goodbye, picked up his briefcase, turned around, and ran right in the wall. It wasn't even 2.5 feet from it. He was right. I was in a lot of trouble. And that's where it started. I became, I remember 2 weeks after trial, and there was no physical evidence in the case, nothing but highly circumstantial, if that. And it was just, it wouldn't, suspects were coming out of the woodwork. They had over a 500 tip line in the police department looking for this guy. And somebody identified me from living next door to me for a couple months, for not even a month, as the person that looked like the composite sketch. Now, that was caller 286, but the police erased the tapes, and there was actually 2 calls that pointed to me, but the police erased the tapes. There was also a police report about another fella 8 days before I was arrested. Now, funny thing, they never went to check on that one. And that's going to be very important that they should have done that. Now, after the 2-week trial, I listened to these people accuse me, the prosecutor called me a monster. Don't be fooled by Mr. Bloodsworth. One thing right after another. When the gavel came down on my life after a 2-week trial in March of, matter of fact, it's right around this time. I was sentenced 37 years ago on March 22nd, 1985. 8 months. The courtroom erupted in applause. Give him the gas and killers. I didn't know what to do. My father tried to object. My mother was weeping, and I just, they had accused me of killing a 9-year-old little girl. And all the things in the world that I would have ever been accused of, that's the one thing that there ain't no way that this old man here would do anything like that. And how they thought it, I don't know. But so, I became a prison librarian when I was at the penitentiary. Now, let me tell you something, what I'm accused of, but I came out of that place without a scratch, because personally, I don't really care about anybody trying to get to me. They can come on, they give it a little try, but I tried back. I would always stand up for myself. And I was probably one of the first persons ever accused of killing a child or walked out in population. Because it was just like a no-brainer for me. I didn't do nothing wrong. And, don't judge me, brother, because you're right in here with me, And I told everybody I was innocent from the time I was arrested to the moment I was released. I wrote my correspondence. I would sign my correspondence, respectively submitted, Kirk Bloodsworth, A period, I period, M period, acronym for an innocent man. Well, I'm going to spring forward. My case was overturned. They sought the death penalty again and still tried to kill me, I remember I needed a place to go. I needed a place to get to. In my church, and people in my church wouldn't even talk to me. They wouldn't write me a letter except my aunt. And, she was obligated because she was my aunt. But I didn't have a place to go. I didn't know where to turn to. And the only sanctuary I had was the Catholic Church. So the Immaculate Conception Church came out in Towson, came out to the county jail, and then eventually a good friend of mine, the name of Al Rose, who passed away a couple of years back and was my clergyman. I took the catechism and was ushered into the church now by Bishop Ricard back in the day underneath the gas chamber, as I was in the cell right below. If you looked in the corner of the Maryland Penitentiary, you could see them stacks right above it, and I was in the cell below that. And he ushered me in the church, and I've been a Catholic ever since. One of the greatest things that I ever did in my life, I read the catechism, but there was another book that interested me. And I don't know how I got this book either. It's I was a librarian. Somebody sent me a bunch of books, and this one book was called The Blooding by Joseph Womble, and he wrote stories back in the day and they were turned into films back in the 70s. The Choir Boys, The Onion Field, things like that. Well, this book was about the first time this new technology was ever used. It was called DNA, deoxyribonucleic acid, or genetic fingerprinting, as they knew back then. Just to try to shorten this up some, it's they had this new test that could pinpoint, they thought, who the real killer was. This guy by the name of Alec Jeffries, whom I have met since then, and invented the process. He mastered organic chemistry, and we're talking about smart people, Vicki, but he mastered organic chemistry when he was at the age of 11. So he's a pretty smart fellow. There's the book right there that I read by Womble that Syl is putting up. And I met Joseph some years ago and everything, but it was his book that gave me the idea. Now, I had to find the DNA. And then when I was reading the book and they were talking about these killings and how they tracked this person down, the way they found out, actually, they vindicated and exonerated a person before they caught the real killer. The DNA excluded that person as the one responsible and caught the other guy because he was overheard bragging to some friends of his in a local pub and that he had took a DNA test for somebody. And the person he took that test for was the real Narborough killer, Colin Pitchfork. Man, I shot up out of bed like a bullet. I come out of there and I just knew that was my, freedom. That was my thing. God was telling me, look, get the DNA. I've heard it said, other exonerees, there's another exoneree, passed away. He said, DNA is God's signature and he doesn't write bad checks. That's the truth. And so I got the prosecutor wrote her a letter and I said, I want this new technology, DNA. I looked into police reports, possible semen stain on undergarment and semen stain on slides, swabbings, all this, many spermatozoa seen, it said. So I wrote the prosecutor a letter and she wrote me back and she said, we regret to inform you that DNA has been inadvertently destroyed. I thought I was a goner then, I really did. And then it just dawned on me, they already withheld evidence in the first trial. That's why we got a second trial. I was just, I didn't know if they knew where it was at. And sure enough, my lawyer goes to the Towson courthouse and it's not in the evidence room where it's supposed to be. He went there to check on it for me because he knew I was going to drive him crazy until he did. And he met the court clerk in my second trial in the hallway. He said, what are you doing here, Bob? Bob Moran is his name. He was a chief judge in Washington, D.C. for the last 20-some years. And he said, I'm looking for the Dawn Hamilton evidence in the Kirk Bloodsworth case. He said, I know where that's at. It was in a paper bag in a cardboard box in the floor in the judge's chambers. It sat there for 7-some years. I didn't know what to do after that. I just said, well, look, we got to take the evidence. And sure enough, we sent it to California. There was only 2 DNA labs in 1992. And both of them were the best geneticists in the country that set them up. The FBI had not yet come online. In April that year, I got a report from Dr. Edward Blake and excluded me as a person responsible for Dawn's murder. Half of one cell was all that separated me from my, sitting here before you today. Well, the prosecution had made an agreement with us. They were going to cut me loose if I made the results, told everybody what the results were. And I said, yeah, I'll do that for sure, because it ain't going to be what you think. I ain't the one, It had nothing to do with it. And so my lawyer kept asking me, he said, Kirk, don't tell anybody. Don't tell anybody the DNA is back yet. So I told everybody, and I never paid attention to that stuff. This was my freedom. And they sent it to the FBI. And not only did they agree with our experts, they found another spot of semen on these undergarments that was not found in the original trial. And they were both the same, but they weren't mine. William Sessions called Ann Brooks, the prosecuting attorney, and told her, you've arrested and convicted a man twice and sent him to death row once for something he didn't do. He's an innocent man. You better get him out of there. William Sessions. I had met Bill some years ago too, but and I was released on June 28th, 1993. I stepped out a free man. Now, flash forward. I've been fighting the death penalty since I got out. You can't kill nobody. And like Sister Helen says all the time, you can't kill people to say killing's wrong. I never understood any of this stuff, but I knew that an innocent person could go to death row. I belong to this organization now, and I'm the executive director of Witness to Innocence. And we have 185 of us who have been exonerated from death row. you know, Houston, we got a problem. And I've never let it go. I kept pushing and pushing. So 10 years later, to sum all this up, I was sitting in my office in Cambridge, Maryland, and the phone rang. And on the caller ID, it said, Baltimore County Government. I thought the last time I talked to them people, it turned out too good. But it was the same prosecutor that called me a monster in 2 different trials, except this time she was asking for Mr. Bloodsworth. And she said, I want to meet you somewhere in Cambridge. I'll meet you anywhere in the state you want to meet. And so I met her at the Burger King in Cambridge. I got fancy Whoppers, you know, so it's, she sat down and said they caught the real killer of Don Hamilton, whom, by the way, was not 6'5". He wasn't even 6 foot tall. He was 5'6" and weighed 160 pounds. Never supported the death penalty in my life. If I ever did, I won't do it now. He pled guilty to Don's murder. And also that police report that came in 8 days before I was arrested that they didn't check, that's who it was. Kimberly Shea Ruffman. Well, I have to tell you, I've been working for Witness to Innocence and several nonprofits over the years. You know, Maryland Citizens Against State Executions, and me and Vicki is comb to earth. I'd have to say, you know, in a good way about this, telling our story. You know, I've spoken at a couple of Catholic high schools, and you know, I'm all for it. I spoke to the big conference of bishops years ago. We did, and so I know the death penalty is wrong because we could kill an innocent person. Harold Wilson from Philly, he just passed away a couple of years ago, and he's one. And there's several, you know, that's happening. This, and I don't know what the death row amount is like, but you know, we're gonna have to end this thing. And I think Syl hit it right on the head. It ain't about what that guy did as much as it is about who didn't do it. In my opinion, it's we can put them people away, and you know, we don't have to execute anybody. Like my friend Freddie Pitts said, he used to be the chairman of the board of Witness to Innocence years ago, and Freddie's since passed away. But in his honor, I'm going to say this: you can free a man from prison, but you can't free him from the grave. We got to stop playing God out here. And I've tried my best to make sure, and my organization is called Witness to Innocence. You can see the big shirt there. And well, the shirt ain't that big, but the man's in it pretty good size. I want to thank you all, and Syl and Vicki, you guys are top notch in my book. And anytime you need me, you just give me a holler. And that goes with you too, Frank. You want to smack this death penalty down? Let's grab it by the horns and show it. You know, I'm not no wallflower.
Thank you. Thank you so much. That's great. I'm now going to turn it over to Representative Frank Ryan, who is a state legislator, and he is leading the fight for abolition. So if I could see you, that would be good. But there you are. Okay.
There we go. First of all, Kathleen, thank you so much. And Syl, Vicki, and Kirk, I am moved all the time by your stories. And unfortunately, I'm about to tell you that what you're going to hear from me is not nearly as compelling because they obviously are the true emissaries about this entire issue. I'm a Catholic. I haven't always been probably the best Catholic. I used to like to tell people that in my original days, I wanted to be a priest in the worst way. And I think the Diocese of Baltimore was pretty convinced that I would have been. So they encouraged me to go into something else. So I became, I got my degree in economics, although I didn't get a PhD in economics. I instead became a CPA, which means that I don't have a personality. So it's one of those things that we have to deal with. But at least I don't have an Eagles logo behind my desk, to be candid with you. I do have to tell you a funny story. Kirk, you're going to appreciate it, laugh out of this. In 2014, I walked across the United States to raise awareness of the needs of kids with disabilities. And I got to Indianapolis. I had gone probably about 1,800 miles. And I got to Indianapolis, and there was the Colts Stadium there. Now you have to appreciate, I've got a 50-pound backpack and an 80-pound cart, and I had already walked 1,800 miles. So I was did not look the best, to put it mildly. If you think I'm ugly now, you should have seen how bad it was back then, because I was pretty disheveled. So I'm standing there, and the stadium is behind me, and I deliberately decided to start looking up and looking around until somebody said something to me. Well, lo and behold, after about 10 minutes, a police officer came by and he said, "Sir," he said, "can I ask you if you need anything?" I said, "No." He said, "Can I ask you what you're doing?" He was very, very polite. And I said, "I've heard that the Baltimore Colts Stadium is here." And he said, "You mean the Indianapolis Colts?" I said, "Well, that's what you people call them." And he said, and this was like, 20 some years, maybe 30 years after it happened. He said, "Oh, I see you don't give up easily." But there's a reason for the moral to that story, is that not letting go and not forgiving is a problem. My walk across the United States was a walk of atonement and gratitude initially, but just shows the way that Christ works. I originally decided I was getting towards the tail end of my career. I was going to walk across the United States. And I have to put it in context. I'd been a volunteer chairman of the board of Good Shepherd Services in Baltimore for about 28 years. It was for children with emotional behavioral problems and developmental disabilities. Some of our children had been abused sexually. Some had been trafficked. So I worked with a lot of the courts, Kirk, that you had to deal with, particularly in Towson. And so I'm very, very familiar with it. So I got to a point in my career where I said, you know what, I need to do something to kind of give back. And the walk of atonement, the walk of gratitude, related to a specific story. We had a young boy who was horribly abused by his father. Father tried to kill him. And he doused him with gasoline and set the house on fire. And through a miracle, and I'm not exactly sure of everything that happened, the young boy survived. And he was in the hospital in critical care for about 30 days, and then he came to us. And his sisters at Good Shepherd were just magnificent sisters. And one of the head of our counselors said to me, he said, "Frank, it would help him to see a male influence that would be gentle." And I said, "Okay, I'm not a trained psychologist, I'm a CPA." He said, "I don't need you to do anything." He said, "Just want you to be there." And I said, "Got it." And he said, "If it gets out of control, we'll take over." So I went down there, and the counselor said to me, he wants to hit you. And I thought, okay, I let him do that. Maybe he needed to get out of his system. And he literally, I would call it a love tap. It was kind of just like this. I mean, it was that you couldn't even, I didn't even know he did it. And I went, and I'm a grandfather. So as a granddad, you'll go, oh, like, and tease a little bit. Well, he started to cry, saying, "Oh, I didn't mean to hurt you." And I went down and said, "Oh my God, no, you didn't. You didn't hurt me." And I used to tell people that, as I'm from inner city Baltimore, my dad died in 1955 on March 13th. And so, as you can tell at my age, I was 3 years old. And I used to tell people I came from an incredibly poor family. My mom had 5 children. My sister was 6 months old when my dad died. And so I always said that, I came from an incredibly poor family. After seeing this young boy at Good Shepherd, I realized I came from the wealthiest family in America, because I never doubted for a second that my mom loved me. Now, I do tell my brothers and sisters that mom loved me more. Right? That's just, I'm the second youngest, so I get a chance to say that. And to which my brother would respond, she said, "That's only because you're ugly." So I had to bear with that as well. So as only brothers can do to one another, that's what happened. So my walk was a walk of atonement and gratitude. And I said the following: if I've ever hurt anybody in my life, I asked that they would forgive me. And I've done my fair share of stupid things. I asked if I've ever helped someone, if they would help another. And if I've ever disappointed someone, I asked that they would pray for me. And then the walk of gratitude was that I would always be thankful that I had some unbelievable gifts and life could have turned out so much different. Kirk, I could have had the same because we were both Marines. It could have happened to either one of us. And so I applaud you, and you're my hero. All three of you are my heroes for what you've gone through and what you've done. So one of the sisters of Good Shepherd said to me before I started walking, she said, would you mind doing this walk and dedicate it to children who have been suffering at the hands of abuse? I said, no, I'll be happy to do that. Little did I know, with the hand of God, that one simple question altered my life in a way that I never would imagine. If you don't know, if you knew me, you would know I'm really pretty driven. I went to Mount St. Mary's College. I graduated in 3.5 years. I worked full time. Went into the Marine Corps the day after I graduated. Well, actually, before I graduated, it was the Mount only graduated students in May. I got done in December, went on active duty at the end of December. And because what I tell people, I had no money. I literally had to do it. I mean, literally, I started with zero. Not a big deal. As I pull out the violin, I mean, it was not that big of a deal, but at the time for me, it was. So I go through and, I look at this thing with the mountain and what had happened, and working full time. I've been pretty driven. And my goal was to do 32 miles a day, 11 days straight, take a day off, carry everything by myself. I was going to go by myself, have no support vehicles, and try to follow a biblical principle, although I did have money with me, a biblical principle that if God wanted to take care of me, he would. And if he didn't, perhaps that's what I needed to learn. When Sister asked me if I would do this to help kids with disabilities, I didn't realize that my entire game plan went from being what I was going to do to what God's plan was. And I knew it on day one. The goal was to help educate people about the needs of children with disabilities. I flew from Baltimore, Maryland to San Diego on March 14th, 2014. I was going to leave at 8 o'clock in the morning on the 15th, put my foot into the Pacific Ocean and walk east. And I was going to do that in the event that something happened physically and I didn't get done, because I had to be done by July 3rd. And if I didn't get done by then, I literally had to go back to work. So I was going to have to finish the walk on weekends. And I needed to be closer to the East Coast when that happened. And so I was planning what was going to happen. I found out on day one, when my goal was to help educate people on the needs of kids with disabilities, I didn't leave the beach until 10, which means I didn't get to 32 miles in that first day, which meant that every stop point that I had for the next 100 days was off. And I then realized that, oh, I'm not in control. And because I was trying to talk to people, people would stop me along the way. And I believe in being true to my word. So if I'm going to educate people, if they want to talk, there were some days that, I might be talking to somebody for an hour and a half. So as that happened, I realized that that was God's plan for me. So I wasn't in control anymore. And when I did that, it really started to there was an epiphany that happened along the way. At first, I was praying for things. And after the discomfort of the walk, Kirk, you and I were taught how to march, but I never realized that when you're marching, I was averaging about 25 to 26 miles a day. And I didn't realize that when you were doing that, the prolonged period of marching like that is different than if you do it 3 or 4 days and then you don't do it for a month or two. And I was in a significant amount of discomfort pretty quickly. And I went from Pennsylvania to Baltimore, and it was in the teens. I got out to California, it was 85 degrees. Within 4 days, I was in the desert and it was 100 degrees. So I wasn't acclimated at all to any of this. And so I was kind of feeling it. So you started to pray in different ways. And I realized that when I was praying, asking for things, that wasn't what I was supposed to be doing. And eventually I went through three stages. I wrote a book about this, and I went through 3 stages. And by the 3rd stage, the issue was I prayed that God would give me the strength to endure the lesson he wanted me to learn. And that's when it really dawned on me that if I really believed in my right to life, it had to be, because I used to be very much in favor of the death penalty. I had to accept that from start to finish. I had to accept the fact that it's not for me. I remember a gospel reading this past Monday, and I try to read, what I tell my family is I try to do a rosary and a gospel reading every day, because I do stupid things every day. And it's my chance to just kind of sit back and kind of remember. But in gospel reading, St. Peter says, it said, Lord, how many times must I forgive my neighbor? 7 times? And then Christ goes on to explain, not 7 times, but not 7 times 7, but to continue to do that. And I thought, real forgiveness can only come about when you can let go. And it's not as much for the person. And candidly, Vicki, you kind of did that to me when we had a chance to talk as well. You and Syl brought that up. And then Kirk, I've always believed that the judicial system was not just. If you did not have the money or the resources, or if you had never experienced the judicial system before, you may not know what to do. And so I found that justice was not equal. If you had the financial resources to defend yourself, you perhaps got a better outcome than if someone who didn't. And I as a person who grew up in poverty, I had that one really struck home. And then when Vicki and Syl, you both just told me about your story, I'm thinking, what, there's merit to this. And so as I started to look at it, I thought, what, I continue to work my life that way. And I had not planned on being in public life. I've only been in office for 4 years. I just got reelected to a 3rd term. And so I was sitting there, someone asked me to run for Congress in 2016. I said, no, I was not going to do it. And lo and behold, the person who was in the current position, the current state representative position that I have currently now, said that person was retiring, and they said, Frank, you really believe Pennsylvania and the United States could go bankrupt? You're an economist, your specialty is a CPA, and I specialize in keeping companies out of bankruptcy. Why don't you do what Christ sent you to do, which is help keep us out of bankruptcy? So I said, you know what, I'll do that, see what I can do, ran for office. And then a good friend of mine, Chris Rabb. Now, Chris Rabb, you have to understand, is considered to be one of the most liberal members of the House of Representatives, and I'm considered to be the most conservative. I have to tell you kind of a funny story. I said, there's a big difference between the two of us. And a couple of reporters started to laugh. I said, he's very liberal and I'm very conservative. And then they really busted out laughing. And I didn't know what they were laughing at. Well, Chris is black. And as you can tell, I'm not. I'm as Irish as Kirk is. I didn't have red hair, I had no hair. But I don't tan, I burn. So when I was walking across the United States, I wore this big hat, gloves, long sleeve shirt, long trousers. I mean, it really looked bad. And so the one reporter said to me, he said, you really don't notice that issue, do you? And I said, actually, I was raised in Baltimore. So no, I don't. That's not what I see. But I said, I do see poverty. And so he said, why are you two doing it? Well, Chris has a different reason for it than I do. In my case, it's my Catholic faith. And again, as the Bishop of Harrisburg will tell you, I'm a constant work in progress. And when I go to confession, they schedule all day Thursday and Friday. It's just easier. And Thank God they don't put it on YouTube or TikTok. There, I'd be in real trouble. Although the advertising revenue could probably generate an awful lot of money to help a lot of people. But I mention that because when you start to examine what happened, it was the Catholic faith that said to me, you know what, vengeance never helps. And Kirk, Governor Ryan of Illinois, no relation, found that there were as many people who were executed on death row who later determined to be innocent. And he put us in, and he got a lot of grief about that. And so he suspended it. So when I agreed to co-prime sponsor the bill with Chris, I said he said to me, he said, you're going to get a lot more grief in your caucus. I'm a Republican, by the way, I have to tell him I'm a Republican. He said, you're going to get a lot more grief in your caucus than I am. And I didn't. I was really surprised. But invariably, people looked at me and said, you're going to the cost side of it, aren't you? And I said, well, the CPA in me says that that's got me concerned. But I said, the real issue for me is not the cost, it's the innocence. And the vengeance doesn't help people heal. And I would be honest with you, if it did, I might even have a different attitude about it, but it doesn't, from what I've been told. And we've had a family member, they weren't murdered, but they were horrifically assaulted. And they, every time the person came back up for parole, you could see her angst and anxiety while that was going on. And the prison system let her know when he was released. And she was on edge the whole time. And so I'm thinking, you know what? That doesn't help the victim in any of this stuff, to keep pulling at that scab all the time. Kirk, I do want to say something to you, though, personally. Because of your case, when we met a little while ago, I'm a real big believer that we have to change how we finance public defenders. Because the one danger of, by the way, I believe we need to abolish the death penalty, but the one thing is, if someone gets sentenced to life in prison without parole, that doesn't mean they're definitely guilty. It just might mean that the death penalty is not on the table. And so, in my mind, a more robust funding. So we're leading that effort as well. I just recently, I'm going to finish up with this comment. I recently had a situation where we had a horrific killing of a young boy by the name of Maxwell Schellenberger in my community. And the parents were the ones who did it. He was tortured and he was starved to death. And so, because of the work I'd done at Good Shepherd, I wanted to lead the effort of the Maxwell's Law. And part of it was in terms of the education aspect of how we can identify abuse, the remediation effort to give additional tools and resources to parents who are in distress, and then punitive, not from the perspective of a death penalty, but that torture should be treated as a type of a crime that's dealt with differently. So the group that was there that asked me, agreed to help me, and said, we want the death penalty for it. And I said, well, look, I said, if you want the death penalty, I'll help you get another prime sponsor, because I can't do that. I can't, and I won't do it. And so they came back and said, no, we saw your commitment to wanting to help Max, and we would rather have that than vengeance. And I explained, Kirk, your case, and Syl and Vicki, I explained your case as well about what the issue was. These were not relatives of the young boy, but it was that visceral reaction that comes about. So, I pledge that we're going to do whatever we can. Chris Rabb and I've had a number of discussions from a legislative perspective, and I hope somebody asks a question on this. The one thing that I would tell people, that if you really want to get it done, you need to make sure that the legislators that you get to help you are stable and are not prone to embellishment, because there are enough people who believe in the death penalty that they need to hear Kirk's story, Vicki and Syl, they need to hear your story. And you can't help but be brought to tears. But if we in the legislative side start I call it throwing bombs at other people who are not supportive. We won't convince them, we'll antagonize them. And we need to get this thing done. And I pledge to do that. So that's my story. And I want to thank again, Kirk, Syl, and Vicki for your fantastic leadership and your families. God bless you all.
Thank you.
I would like to make a comment about your kind of coming to terms with the death penalty was not consistent with the respect for life issue. After we had made our decision and after the assailant was actually sentenced, we were out in Colorado where he was captured because he was attacking women out there. And reporters backed us into the corner about opposing the death penalty for Shannon's murder. And we were talking about it in the context of our religion, and they kept, but you know, this one reporter, he said, but it was your daughter, and how could you? And it just kind of instantaneously, he cornered me. I had no other response. I said, if you can't stand by your principles when it's difficult, they're not your principles. And you know, you just, if you think through what it is we say we believe, then you've got to either buy the story or you don't buy the story. You can't have a foot in the bucket and one out.
Yeah, and that's it.
Absolutely.
Good. Pray hard. Oh, pray hard.
Thank you all so much. You have once again wowed me. This is wonderful. So I have some questions, a couple from the chat. The first one is for Kirk. What is your understanding of what turned the tide in conservative Virginia, and how could that happen in Pennsylvania? And Kirk, I'm going to ask you to go first, and then I want to also ask Representative Ryan about that.
Well, I think obviously it's a lot of what Representative Ryan says. You know, money's a big issue, but you know, I think the tables had turned in Virginia. And by the way, it's an old Confederate state. People who are, I have to tell you, you know, we have a better way of punishing folks today. And the death penalty's had its day, man. It hasn't saved us one bit, not from nothing. And only a certain percentage of it gets it anyway. What the society deems as the worst of the worst. I think Virginia, and you know, I've met the guy that was the warden there in prison. You know, he oversaw like 62 executions, and you know, I think we just need to stop it. And like in Maryland, what the big thing was there was not just the money, but innocence played a big part, and the Catholic Church, of course. And Vicki and I, we were on a commission together, and a lot of things made it happen. But Virginia was a shocker. I submitted testimony to them about the same thing that I'm telling you all tonight, in which I will say one more time. You can't kill someone and get them back if they're innocent. I'd rather keep the evil person or the person that committed the evil act alive and save the rest of the innocent people that come through the system than I would to execute 1, 2, 3 people. And, you know, we don't need it to say killing is wrong. And, you know, I'm going to coin Sister Helen's phrase on that. But Virginia was a shocker. But, you know, it took New Hampshire, it took us 20 years to do that. I was working on that death penalty thing in New Hampshire when Governor Sheehan was, Sheehan was the governor. So, you know, that's been 20 years ago. And but we finally got it. Washington State, they just up and said it was unconstitutional for them. And, you know, Maryland and Connecticut and New Hampshire and New Mexico, Colorado. I mean, you just keep on coming. And every place that has abolished the death penalty has had people like Vicki and innocent people like myself testifying in front of the legislature. I mean, it's a far greater thing that we do at this point. And I'm glad to see it. I can't wait till the governor signs. I'm going to do a jig right in the kitchen here.
That's great. Thanks. So Rep. Ryan, I want to refer that question to you. What do you see as the impact that Virginia's move to abolition has on us? And I know we've talked about that, and you said that, you know, there's some interesting complexities in there.
There's a whole bunch of things in the case of Virginia that came about. One is they had a change of leadership and control. The House and the Senate and the governor's office were all controlled by the same party. Yep. And that does have an impact. But I'm not trying to be funny when I say this, but conservatives think differently than liberals do. And that's not neither good nor bad, but the way you appeal to them is different. And so I would tell you, I've had some people on the Republican side who called and actually co-sponsored the bill. What will typically occur is that the life imprisonment without the possibility of parole is a really big thing. And I would tell you, on the Republican side, and what would help turn the tide in Pennsylvania, is the understanding if that meant what it says. If it doesn't, it won't pass. And it just won't. I mean, I'm going to tell you that right now. And I was surprised, even on the Democrat side, when I talked to some people who I thought would be in favor of eliminating the death penalty, they were not. And their comment was they did not feel comfortable that life imprisonment without the possibility of parole meant anything. So what happened in Pennsylvania last session, we were getting ready to have a hearing on it. The head of the Judiciary Committee was very, very willing to do it. And he said, Frank, you know, I'm not as hard and fast on this issue as you might think. And then COVID-19 hit. But concurrent with that, and Chris Rabb and I have had this discussion, there were some members on the Senate and some on the other side, for lack of a better term, that started to really advocate that once we get rid of the death penalty, let's start getting away and getting rid of life imprisonment without parole. And the minute we started doing that, then the entire issue died. It fell apart. So I've crafted a bill. I think Chris Rabb's bill is still there, and I'm obviously still a co-prime sponsor. But I said to Chris, I wanted to craft a bill in the event that it doesn't move quickly, that basically says that humanitarian release does not apply in the case of a death penalty type case, meaning if it's something for which a death penalty could have been administered, that person would not be allowed to get humanitarian release. Now, it doesn't mean that they would give up their rights of appeal because of that issue. And so that's a big stumbling block for a lot of people. And that's why I made a comment to you about the, and by the way, Chris Rabb was wonderful at this. I said, when we start doing things outside of it, I'll give you a good example. Someone one time asked me to endorse them for office. I said, I will, but I don't know if you want that. And he said, what do you mean? I said, if I endorse you, you're now going to be tied to me. And my political philosophies will spill over on you and could have a negative effect on you. And I'm not going to alter the reasons I was elected so that I don't hurt your re-election campaign or your election campaign. I said, I'm not trying to be disingenuous, but I have a responsibility to the people that elected me. My goal is my election was to get certain things done, not necessarily to be an advocate for somebody else. So he said, no, I understand that. Literally 2 weeks later, a budget issue came up and I took a very firm stance on something. And he called me and said, what are you doing? People are accusing me of being backed by you. And I said, well, why do you think I cautioned you about it? I said, do you want me to disavow you? And he said, no, and he was elected, but he came back later on. He said, I get what you're now telling me. I didn't understand it. So I've taken his approach on that. I don't now endorse anybody for that reason, unless the person clearly understands that that's the significance of it. So I think Pennsylvania's got a capability of getting this thing done. I think it requires us to be deliberate, strategic, rational, and prayerful, so that we can stay in tune with what the concerns are. Your testimony today, not mine, but Kirk's and Syl's and Vicki's testimony, Kathleen, will go a long, long way, I think, to help an awful lot of people.
No, I agree. They are very powerful, powerful messengers. So I have a question from the audience. What is it that made Vicki and Syl, you, and then Kirk, what is it that makes you want to share your stories? Because this can't be easy to relive all of this. You're on mute. You're on mute, Syl.
First time that's ever happened. You know,
I agree with that.
we confronted the devil at the gates of hell, I think. You know, we were staring this thing in the face. The prosecutor we were dealing with during her tenure as the DA in Pennsylvania, I think accounted for, I did a tally while she was in office, I think she accounted for 53 or 54% of the death penalty convictions that were handed down in the state of Pennsylvania. The defense attorney who represented the assailant in the case wrote me out. He made a very strong statement at the sentencing hearing that we had put a hurdle in front of the to stop the killing that was going on in Philadelphia. He wrote me afterwards, and he said, I don't care what she said in her press conference after the sentencing. When she came out and announced that she was going for the death penalty, she intended to pursue the death penalty. You know, most people don't realize when someone's put to death by execution, the cause of death put on the death certificate is homicide. And we didn't want to be any party to it. And, you know, we've seen it. We haven't seen it in the way that Kirk has seen it, but we saw it from a side that it was there was nothing pretty about it. And, you know, if you look at the statistics, my business is, I'm not a CPA, I'm an economist. My business is studying numbers. You study the numbers, and I'm not talking about the cost. I'm talking about the inequities of how this thing is applied. Yep. You know, you have to be pretty callous when you look at those numbers to understand that it's not equal application of justice by any stretch of the imagination.
And when you start working with these families, when you work in family support groups and other places that are working this through, I just leave these meetings and whatnot, and you get so torn apart because you see how much it can destroy these people, and they keep holding on to that. Well, you told me in 2 months that they would put him to death, and that they hold on to that anger, and they hold on to that. And you see what has destruction, and you watch it go through these families, and it's this horrible. And then you try to explain to them that sometimes it just kills you. It's not the people that it's going to kill you if you hold that anger, and then destroys their life. And you've got to make them understand that. It's hard.
One other aspect that never occurred to me at the time, we did meet Jerry Gibbons, the fellow from Virginia who presided over 62 executions. Right. He came to the realization fairly far into that count where he almost put a guy to death who was within a week or two of being put to death, who was declared innocent by other evidence, and the idea that he was going to, quote, murder, that's what homicide is, someone who was innocent shook him to the very bottom of his soul, and you know, he just couldn't have any more, couldn't have any part in it. Now, God rest Jerry's soul. He died about a year ago of COVID. He was one of the early victims of the COVID epidemic, but he was definitely done with the death penalty long before he went to meet his maker.
You know, it was too easy to put me on death row, to make it simple answer here. It was too easy because they were trying to, you know,
Solve a
no
case.
matter what happened, they just didn't care about other than getting a conviction. So it should be about justice and not conviction. And we can't do that. It's in this society, at least at this time. You know, everybody feels the visceral effects of, if you sit there and listen to Vicky's story and Syl's, and you know daggone well, but I knew that from 8 months to the time I was arrested, I was sitting on death row. Nobody in the world should go.
We lost you.
Yeah, he's on mute.
Kirk,
He's
you're
on
on,
mute.
you're on mute.
I don't know how that happened. I'm sorry. All the it just did it itself. I never touched it, and it's a ghosting machine, so that's what it is. And so, you know, I've seen enough of this. I've seen when I first got out, there was like maybe 30 of us tops. This was in 1994 to 93. And now there's 185 death row alone. You know, over 2,000 innocent people are being convicted, you know, for crimes they didn't commit. It's been in, I don't know how many years. And all these fellows that I see every day as the executive director of Witnessed Innocence, it's enough to, you know, I'm never going to stop talking about it. And, you know, it's not necessarily been the greatest thing for my life because I suffer from PTSD and a bunch of other ailments, and because of my unjust incarceration, but they almost killed me. And I want to kill the thing that almost killed me. And that's the death penalty.
Well said, sir.
Very well.
I've put my email in the chat a couple of times. I would just invite anyone who would like to do more. If you would like to do a film screening or host a book club or have a speaker, please be in touch. Happy to help you with that. And let me just find Eric. Eric, I can't see you. I know you're here. I just want to take a minute to let Eric say hello. Where are you?
Up here.
I'm here.
Oh,
On
there
my
you are, right in the
calendar.
middle. Okay.
Thank you for everybody who spoke, for everybody who gave testimony, for all the questions. Absolutely amazing. My name is Eric Failing. I'm the executive director for the Pennsylvania Catholic Conference. Those who do not know, the Pennsylvania Catholic Conference is the public affair arms of the Catholic bishops in Pennsylvania. My job as part of public affairs is one of the lobbyists, if you will, for the church. And I have to tell you this honestly, I'm not saying this just because he's right here, but I was on yet another call today on another issue with another group of lobbyists. And the question came up, well, who would be the best guy for this issue? And we both said at the same time, well, Frank Ryan. And I feel bad for him. I do, because he has the reputation in the legislature as being the go-to guy when you want someone who will honestly address the issue, who can span both sides of the aisle and will argue for what's right because it's the right thing to argue. So you have a tremendous, tremendous champion with Representative Ryan. I think the absolute world of him. On behalf of all the bishops of Pennsylvania, thank you for everything. How do we end this scourge? of the death penalty? This, right now, what we're doing. We have to get more people to understand. You know, I'm a very competitive guy, right? I'm a sports guy. And one of the things in sports, it's no surprise, we always try to figure out what the other team is going to do, right? If Sun Tzu, you know, the ancient philosopher, know thy enemy, know thyself, right? The military, it's required reading at the Naval Academy. It's required reading, at least it was at one point at Harvard Business School. You have to know what the other side is doing. So when I started taking a look at the death penalty, as a young man, I thought the death penalty was a good thing. It was my father who sat me down and told me it was not. My father is a retired police officer from over 20 years from the state of Delaware. He's the one who said, no, the death penalty is not the right way to go. He said, now think, who wants the death penalty? And I was stunned. I said, well, the victims. He said, no, the devil. And I said, I don't understand. He said, well, think about it. If it really is a fight between good and evil, and the death penalty is typically given out for murder one, is the victim the one who is in jeopardy of going to hell? Well, no, that's the innocent. Right? The murderer can take a body, but they can't take the soul. The devil's not interested in the body. The devil's interested in souls. So what is he really after? He's after people to seek vengeance. He's after all of those souls. And the death penalty is the way to get others to break that cardinal command of thou shalt not kill. He was not vague on the mountain when he talked to Moses. He didn't say thou shalt not kill except for the asterisk below. Right? So I offer that. I thank you all for your continued advocacy. We will continue to advocate all that we can for this. The bishops are 100% obviously behind this movement. And they will never let up. It's not, well, I don't know. Well, I'm not sure the politics. It's Eric, go out and work with everybody and anybody you need to and get this done. So thank you all.
Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you again, everyone. I really appreciate your joining us. And again, if you want to do this again, it's klucas@padp.org. Thank you all and good night.
Thank you, Kathleen. Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you.